Hello, everyone. This is John Fawcett. This is episode 24 of A Musical Soliloquy. I'm here with the host, Stephen Song, and I'm so happy to be here. We're talking about maybe having me on the show. Zach actually, inquired this before, and so I'm glad it finally happened. So,
Yes, thank you so much, John, for joining. John is one of my good friends, and we met almost 10 years ago, if not more. In today's episode, I'd like to ask John about his musical background, how he fell in love with the violin, music in general. We overlapped in college 2 times. And so, of course, we'd like to talk about that, our experiences, our teachers, inspirations, and mentors. And then finally, I'd like to ask about what he's doing now because I believe you just graduated and you're on to big projects. So I'm really curious about that. So to begin, I'd like to ask how you started music and what led you to pursuing music as a career.
great. And I just want to say, to kind of preface that everyone in the music world, it's a tight net, but Stephen and I have had actually, we have just happen to have a pretty parallel path and just have recently branched off in our different directions. So, yeah, so my musical background was one like, I was just like any ordinary kid in the sense that where I grew up, there wasn't a big music scene going on. I grew up in Central Oregon. The biggest thing that was happening in music in Oregon was in PYP. So like shout out to PYP friends or PYP alum who might be watching. I know my good friend Evan from Shepherd School was part of PYP in Portland, but Portland was 3 hours away. So when I was young, I was the weird kid who played violin. I have another good friend who went to San Francisco Conservatory recently, probably just graduated. And then I had another friend who went to CAM. But by and large, there weren't many musicians where I grew up. I grew up in Central Oregon. No one really knew anything about the violin, and most of my musical inspiration, experience, or motivations when I was young came from my parents' love for music. My dad has a big CD collection of at least 600, probably 700 CDs at home. Mostly classical music, jazz, a lot of rock stuff, that he would have grown up listening to in the 70s and 80s, stuff like that. But anyways, I just listened to a bunch of stuff. So the way I came into music was not kind of the traditional professional musician sense. It was the sense of having like parents that were not professionally musical, but just enjoyed music. And I kind of came to know music through an enjoyer's perspective rather than like a, this is what I want to do. Me playing violin, I'm the first musician of that sort in my family, if you will, essentially. So yeah, it was a weird kind of upbringing because I would eventually, about like 7 years, I think it was, into my violin training, I would go to the University of Oregon for lessons, which was a 2.5 hour commute one way. So around it was 5 hours and, through the mountain pass. So it was like kind of an arduous drive. So it was kind of like I had one life at home where, I hung out with people who didn't know anything about music. And then another life, once a week I'd go to Eugene for lessons.
Yeah, that's actually similar to myself. I didn't come from a musical background, and so I can totally relate to you there. But I think it's amazing that your family loved classical music and surrounded you with it. So you mentioned you went to study with this professor at the University of Oregon. What was that experience like, and what eventually led you to Colburn?
Yeah, that was great. I would say in terms of what that experience is like. So I was 12 years old when I started working with Kathy. Kathryn was concertmaster at the Eugene Symphony. This makes me feel bad. Like last time I got in touch with her was last semester. So, every time I talk about my teachers, I'm like, oh, like kind of shooting myself in the foot for not being in better contact. Anyway, yeah, she's wonderful. And she was a very, very unique player. And definitely, like all the teachers I've had have some kind of influence on my style and how I resonate, how I relate to the violin right now, and how I play. Kathy certainly is no exception to that. She had a way of playing that was very unique and kind of bold, definitely took a lot of risks and had a lot of personality in her playing. That I kind of carried with me. Most of her students were at the university. And something that was interesting about that experience going to Eugene was a lot of the kids, that would be in my studio class were all like, I was a 12-year-old and they would be in their 20s. They would be like me and Steven's age. And so it was very strange. And it was a very strange childhood to be going to school with, kids like outside the music world and then be spending a day or two in Eugene every week with these kids that were older than me. Like I didn't really have a group of people. Like I didn't know who my group of people were per se.
Yeah, I personally experienced the same thing. I didn't really bond a lot with the people in my high school just because by the age
Mhm.
of 13, I started focusing on music so much, and it almost feels like you have this second life outside of your school. So I can
Yeah.
totally relate. And just to clarify, this teacher, her name is Kathryn Lucktenberg.
Yeah, and so one cool thing about Catherine is she was kind of a gateway to this gentleman named Jan Sloman, who was a friend of hers. And actually, one summer she filled in for Jan Sloman, and that was with Phoenix and Danny. But this was before I knew all of them because this was the summer before the summer that I went to Meadowmount. So she filled in to teach for Jan. So then all the Meadowmount kids knew about her. So that was kind of fun. But she was good friends with him. And also, like other students that had studied with Catherine, she kind of relayed them to Jan Sloman. I was one of those students who she told Jan about me. And I was eventually able to make it up to Meadowmount. I think I was 15, my first summer at Meadowmount. And I worked with him. Talk about boldness and talk about vision, like there's no one else like Jan. Mr. Sloman was a very special, very dear teacher to me. And I think we'll talk about him more. But essentially, I think because he was the single biggest encouragement and motivation for me, he maybe saw that I had a vision, I had a voice for the violin. And, like I'm very attracted to recordings that were maybe of a different era where, musicians had more of a distinctive style or individualistic style than you hear today. And I think Mr. Sloman maybe saw in some students, I think for everyone, I'm not an exception. For everyone, he ventured to bring out their own unique voice. I think he did that to me, and he would kind of like see how far that would go. Because a lot of the students were younger too. And it's like they still were developing a lot technically and learning. And he was able to synthesize this kind of ambition to draw out your voice and this kind of artistic emancipation while at the same time like working on technique. He was such a good teacher. He like had both sides to him, which is kind of a rare ability to be able to synthesize both the technical world and also the musical artistic sense. So meeting Jan and being able to study with him furthermore after that was a blessing to me. I'm grateful that that road kind of opened up to me when I was young.
Yeah, so you studied with Miss Luchtenberg in person, I imagine, through your teen years up until college, and then you took Skype lessons with Mr. Sloman because he was in Dallas and Cleveland.
Right. And Catherine stopped teaching. She retired from the university. And that was a point where it was kind of like a weird elided overlap. Started working with Sloman more over Skype. And, that was like a lot of teachers. It's hard for people who are young and maybe teaching a few students. You can appreciate how difficult it is to teach not in person, how much easier it is, how much more of a periphery there is, my context there is when you're there with a student. And a lot of teachers lose a lot when they're teaching over Zoom or Skype. This was before Zoom days, so we still had Skype. Solomon I think he had so many students that he taught over Skype that he was so alert. And like a lot of teachers, I'd have lesson at Skype and I was like, okay, I can get away with some things, they'll be less picky because maybe it'll time out or something, or my tone won't be as evident, not with Jam, not with Mr. Sloman. He would be just as demanding. And I can still see him, like I'll be playing over Skype and he says, hey, stop, 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 stop. Yeah.
So Mr. Sloman was one of the pioneers of online violin lessons, and
Yeah.
he taught so much online. In
Yeah.
fact, because he taught at the Meadowmount School of Music, for those that don't know, is a summer festival in Westport, New York, founded by Ivan Galamian, and it's known as the practice boot camp because you have to practice 5 hours a day. Anyways, Mr. Sloman, he would gather these students at Meadowmount, and then he would teach them throughout the year. He would offer them lessons online. And a lot of the students at Meadowmount continued with Mr. Sloman, maybe partially with their local teacher, but then maybe not secretly with Mr. Sloman. He really fostered this education and really trained these violinists, and they went to Meadowmount many times. Because I mentioned Meadowmount, let's just talk about it because that's actually where we met for the first time. And it's funny because I believe you went there twice, and then the first summer we barely knew each other, but then the second summer we actually met more officially.
So Steven was kind of actually a Meadowmount legend back in the day. Remember you played Walton, I think? I didn't really know him. And the first summer I went to Meadowmount, I was very much of a outsider coming into a new scene. I didn't know any of the kids that were there, and I was like a little 15-year-old. The second time I went to Meadowmount, I had made some connections from the year before, And I actually, like, to this day, I have a lot of musical friends that I keep in touch with that I had met at Meadowmount. So that was pretty awesome. But like, yeah, actually, Steven was the first person on the boat, on the ferry coming to Westport that I met the second year of Meadowmount. And so we quickly bonded. Just, I think we're like minded and analytical and have a lot of common interests. Yeah, we just bonded really well that summer, I think. And I'm grateful that, like, that summer, the second summer was a lot. It felt like I was, going through the motions a lot more naturally, and it just felt much more familiar.
What were some of your memories at Meadowmount? Because you went there for 2 summers, and the second summer there, you performed the Korngold Concerto, which I still remember to this day because it was such an electric performance.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, it was the first time where in the music world, the world of all this endeavor I put into my music was distinct to my entire life. Like, it was the first time where it didn't feel like there were like two sides. One, I was at school, I was a student going into classes like everyone else, and then coming home and then having 5 hours of practice to do while everyone else was playing soccer. This was the first time where like my worlds were kind of synthesized. And it was like, for a kid, it was like really, really meaningful. There's also something about the dedication because, like, when Steven says boot camp, it really, like, that was the vision of it. And I think they endeavor today to make sure that that remains the vision, that this is supposed to be something that's quite intense and something that's kind of isolated from the outside world, like a kind of place you go into and you come out with a new sense of dedication. Also, you come out like at a higher level, of course, but like with a new sense of what you're doing with your art. That synthesis of my, music world and just who I am as a person kind of connecting is something that stood out for me. And I think that produced a lot of beautiful memories. And it was the first time, like, my life as a kid, getting to know myself and my music were on the same page. Playing soccer with everyone, and everyone's like, yeah, your music is at the same crux of their life as you. That was really cool. Also, I want to say I'd always come back so motivated. There were kids who just loved what they did so much. And I discovered that love for what I do more than, oh, it's just something I want to do because my teacher said I'm good at it and, I might have a job someday. It's like I discovered this love that was very deep. And I remember there were kids who, like, after the 5 hour mark that we practiced, they'd practice more. In the evening, they do a sixth and seventh hour. And I remember challenging myself to do the same, not because I was a competition, but just because I loved it. So,
Yeah, I have the same exact experiences. The first time I went to Meadowmount was when I was 13, and that was a whole new world. First ever music camp and exposure to like minded string players. And I felt the complete same. I met so many good friends, and all of my most beautiful memories seemingly were made there. Over the course of 6 summers, I went there 6 times, which is a lot. So I'm sure we'll talk about it much more throughout this podcast. Just moving forward a little bit, the final year, your senior year, I remember you were taking auditions, and by that point, I was already at Colburn. And so I remember you came over for your audition and we met up briefly. But
right.
little did I know that we ended up going to Colburn together. And so that's where our friendship actually really sort of blossomed. I'm 1 year older than John, but we spent 3 years at Colburn together. And so, yeah, what was the audition process like, and how did you end up at Colburn Conservatory?
Yeah, it was kind of windy. I didn't expect to end up at Colburn. I was initially waitlisted, and I remember my first trial with Mr. Lipsett very well. I kind of came with my mom and had my mom sit at the side of the studio. She wasn't allowed to come in. But the one thing I really remember is that, I offered Mr. Lipsett, I would say, Mr. Lipsett, after the lesson was done, like, is there a fee? I really appreciate this. Like, what do you charge? And he's like, this is your audition. You don't pay for an audition. So I remember that. And then I remember later, a few months later, I came to audition and he was very nice and he said, you made a good impression. I remember meeting a bunch of people, like not only at Colburn, but when I went to audition for Curtis, I remember meeting a lot of people I had known about. And same thing, like people that you and I know who are now have gone on to be competition winners or have performance avenues. I would run into them at auditions, and I was just this kid from Oregon, but I met a lot of people. So yeah, the audition experience was quite like a fruitful year for me. I think I grew a lot. It was also like really eye-opening and fun to travel around. And, it was also kind of uncertain. I didn't know if I would end up at a college like Denver University or Colburn. Like I had all kinds of schools that I auditioned for after coming out of high school.
Yeah. So, as I remember, you were actually going to go to Cleveland Institute of Music to study with Jan Sloman, but that sort of fell through and you ended up going to Colburn. So, what was
Right.
that like?
I feel like some things happen for a reason. And now having have what we're going to talk about next is CIM. Maybe this is a good segue. Being an alum from Colburn, having studied with Mr. Lipsett made a lot of sense going into CIM, where I would be exposed to kind of like a more all-encompassing approach to music. For one thing, the Cleveland Orchestra is one of the most individualistic and I think significant and important orchestral institutions in the United States. Was like across the street, and being able to see concerts there, the chamber music program that was quite excellent, and just different ways I did more experimenting with my style of playing there. It made a lot of sense that I went to Colburn before coming to CIM, because Colburn and Mr. Lipsett kind of were able to give me the tools and also the discipline to kind of facilitate a space for me where I would be able to grow and explore more later.
Yeah, I had the same sort of feelings. We both went from Colburn in our undergrad to CIM for our masters. And so, of course, we shared lots of memories at Colburn and lots of meals and fun times and trips. And we talked a lot about violin as well and about Mr. Lipsett's philosophies. And so, what overall did you gain the most from your time studying with Mr. Lipsett?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Mr. Lipset is a very he's an anomaly of a teacher. No matter where you are, he has a way of guiding you to a place where you're ready. You're ready to go into music professionally when you're done studying with him. And he has a kind of scaffolded method of teaching. He has a solution for everything. He has an incredible analytical mind and a technical solution for every problem. And there's no blind spots with him. Actually, one of the things with Lipset is that's it. It's like if something's not working, he knows why and he's able to help. He was very hard on me. And that whole period of time of not letting me get away with things, having the idea that there is a correct way, there is a right way to do things, especially with a craft with violin, which is so by its nature an unnatural thing to do. There are things that work and there are things that don't work. And, I really appreciate that Lipset was able to distinguish and reinforce the pathways that do work and are functional, and that he would not let things slide with me, because at the end of the day, having mastery over technique will allow one to realize a full potential with their music making. When you perform, you don't want to really be thinking about your intonation when you perform, or like how smooth can my bow changes be. I think when you perform, you want to be thinking about how much can you lift this score off the page and inspire people. So having that technical facility from Mr. Lipset really helped me going forward.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a great way to describe his teaching and his philosophies. And it's interesting because both me and you, I would say we were quite developed players even before going to Mr. Lipset. I mean, we had performed lots of major concertos and studied lots of great repertoire, but not to make a big deal out of ourselves, but even at our high level, we still had things to improve on. And I think that's what Mr. Lipset was really great at, because even at a very high level, there's even higher levels and tiers within that high level. And I think that's what he stressed a lot, and I gained a lot out of his teaching.
Right. One of the difficult things about violin is I think the majority of people who probably study, it's so easy to shortcut things, and there's a lot of repertoire we want to play. It's very hard when we're young to have the patience to actually train and develop in a way that avoids injuries, or to do things in the correct way. Is it something that requires a lot of patience? And what Lipset kind of did, I came into a studio and he kind of took apart my playing despite, the experience I've had, the performance experience, and we kind of started at the beginning. I remember doing Gaviniers with him, his etude book that he uses. And I told him at the beginning, like, I've done this book 3 times already. He's like, okay, well, we're going to do it again. We're going to do it right this time. So I think what I was trying to say is it takes a lot of patience to really train the correct way. And most people, there are inevitably kind of blind spots or kind of shortcuts that you will take as a student in order to be able to play repertoire you want to play. And so Lipset was really good at breaking that down. And the foundational elements of your playing, that weren't kind of up to snuff for what you wanted to. I mean, you go to Colburn to be a performing art. You go to Colburn to be a professional in music. I mean, if that wasn't your goal, this wouldn't be the institution you're going to. So with that understanding, Lipsett, I think, really cared about his students and put a lot of integrity into his teaching in terms of, okay, anything that's rusty, anything that's not quite working or that was shortcutted, we're going to go out and reharness it. So
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I think what really stood out about Mr. Lipsett's teaching was his honesty. A lot of teachers, maybe because they want to say that their students are good or they want their students to learn hard repertoire, they do take little shortcuts. But Mr. Lipsett, he doesn't care where you come from. He doesn't care how many competitions you might have won. He looks at your playing from a very honest perspective and he judges with his set of criteria. And I think he doesn't get phased. And so I think that's why he's able to produce many very good students, because he really doesn't care so much about connections and he really focuses on his art of teaching.
and I'll add on good teachers too. I've met a lot of fellow peers and colleagues who have been students of Lipsett students now. There's something about Lipsett's teaching that has kind of streamlined into now pedagogues that have studied with him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Mr. Lipsett taught so many phenomenal violinists: Robert Chen, Daniel Belen, Fabiola Kim, just to name a few. And they're all great teachers now. And I'm sure Mr. Lipsett's philosophies transferred over. And I do know that Mr. Lipsett actually had a lot of his students act as his assistants. So he also taught the art of teaching as well. So that's really amazing. What sort of memories at Colburn stood out? Because obviously, Colburn, for those that don't know, is a very amazing institution for music. It's not very well known amongst the non-music world, but in the music world, it must be the most coveted music school because it's completely tuition free. It's located in Los Angeles downtown. You're studying with amazing artists, and it's just almost a utopia for music school.
Yeah, right. Well, it's kind of like it's a different world inside the building. The contrast between the environment inside Colburn and greater downtown LA was kind of stark because what was interesting about Colburn is I think I have memories of the beauty and integrity of really taking my art seriously, kind of in combination to seeing the environment Los Angeles, which, there's a lot of homeless disparity. There's a lot of problems, not only problems, but there's a lot of different people living in LA. I mean, the diversity of the population is just incredible. There's like a little Ethiopia, and there's like in Glendale, there's a lot of Armenians. So being in LA, you get to meet a lot of different people. And although you don't really get the normal college experience at Colburn, you still get that. And I want to also bring a shout out to some things I got involved in Colburn, such as Street Symphony, which is violinist named Vijay Gupta. It was kind of like at the helm of these pool of musicians who have, if I could describe it in a shallow lens, it's trying to have an altruistic effort with your music. But even deeper level, it's to like, how can we really facilitate our music in a way that is so purposeful? How can we meet purpose and how can we work for making this world a better place? And how can we tie that in with our music in the most beautiful way? I know that Street Symphony has done so much, not only like objectively, but also in terms of morale for the community there, for people who kind of just ended up in like desperate situations. And I got to see that part of the world, when I was down in LA, and being involved with organizations like Street Symphony was incredible. And I was kind of able to marry, this one side of this art form, there's this lineage of great players of great classical music. The instruction that we receive at Colburn follows suit from the beauty of like really taking things seriously and training really hard, but also being able to apply that to other areas of, not only altruism, but like making this place we live in a better world, and to really helping people and to expanding our own specialty to serve a even higher purpose was really cool. And something I kind of, not directly from my studies at Colburn, but like just being in LA.
Yeah, absolutely. I did not expect that, but I think that's amazing that you mentioned that as maybe being one of your most memorable experiences.
And it wasn't like a talking point for me either, but when you tell me memories about LA, I mean, that's a big one and something that's made a big impact for me, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So just transitioning to CIM, I know we already talked about it a little bit, but as I remember, you were going to study with Jan Sloman again and Jaime Laredo, but Mr. Sloman passed away, unfortunately, right as you got there. And so you actually ended up studying with Malcolm Lowe for a bit. We all dealt with Mr. Sloman's death together. And so what was that transition to CIM like?
Sloman was almost like a father to me in terms of my violin training. It was kind of heartbreaking because I was going to study with Sloman in undergrad. We were ready to have me on board at CIM, and I had got off the wait list, and there was kind of a feeling that, oh, if I get into Mr. Lipsett's studio, it's a no-brainer. I should do that because it's an honor to study with Mr. Lipsett. But Sloman's passing was kind of tragic for me because I was going to study with him, and I was really looking forward to continuing with him. And it was hard and also very motivating going forward because, like Sloman had a lot of faith in a lot of his students. He had a lot of faith in me as well. And living up to that vision he saw in me, because he saw something in me. And like, I still think of him all the time when I play. I think of like what he saw in the voice I wanted to project. He was a very unique teacher. Like, I'll never have a teacher quite like him. I mentioned before, it's like this beautiful synthesis between this artistic vision he had and also having a technical foundation that's practically helpful. As I teach more, probably won't be the teacher Mr. Sloman could be, but I would like to have the same applications for my students. I like to be strong in both sides of the spectrum as well.
Just for those that don't know, Jan-Mark Sloman, we talk about him a lot on the show, but Mr. Sloman was a great violinist and even greater pedagogue, I think. He really could explain anything and everything on the violin from a technical, from musical, philosophical perspective. He really understood it all, and more than anything, he really mentored and nurtured his students. He really cared about them. He gave us extra lessons. He always offered to let us play in studio class or do whatever. And even for little things like violin buying tips or negotiating tips or tips on how to schedule your practice so that you don't waste time. Little things like that. He would always be there, and he always had great advice. He was very straightforward, and I think that was what made his teaching so great. I think a good teacher is able to communicate very clearly and directly, but also have that sort of vision like you were talking about. I'm of course sad to hear that your wanting to study with him didn't end up working out again, but of course I think that lets us cherish our moments with him even more.
Yeah, and I kind of appreciate the impulse he created in us. His favorite expression, actually, I don't know if it's the same, but like, he had a website, and you go on the website, and it's the quote from Michelangelo of carving the structure out of the marble. It's something that it might not be clear, which is so much of a simpler way of thinking of it than, trying to create this perfect thing. It's like kind of realizing that voice, it's already in you, but you just have to patiently adjust and cultivate a sense for it over time.
Yeah. So just moving forward, you ended up studying with Jaime Laredo and Malcolm Lowe, and you were at CIM for 3 or 4 years, I believe.
Yeah, for a few years. I had graduated my master's from CIM, and the third year I ended up doing like a graduate diploma, which is like just a really low key thing. It was almost in the sense it's like I wasn't sure what I was doing. At this point, I had been taking auditions, and I still wasn't sure if I wanted to do orchestra, or I got to a place where, Stephen, I mean, we've talked about our grievances before in terms of we get to this place in music, and it seems like there are very selective avenues to go. Like, either you're in an orchestra or you just do a bunch of competitions or you find a teaching job. So that third year at CIM was I had finished my master's, but I was also fortunate to do more performing in the area and also just kind of like expand a presence for myself.
Yeah, so you did more performing in the Cleveland area, and there is a decent music scene there, of course, with the TCO and everything. What memories did you have from studying with Jaime Laredo and Malcolm Lowe in particular?
Well, Jamie Laredo, because I've seen you guys on episodes talking about him. It would make me so happy to like all of Laredo students kind of being in a circle. And because first of all, I'm so lucky, I consider myself so fortunate to have been able to work with him. Laredo was an interesting prospect because he had very general, forthright input about your playing, like about the style, about vibrato, and about legato. Sloman, by contrast, would break things down in very much detail, which is the teaching I really much like. So in the moment working with Mr. Laredo, I kind of found myself like wanting more. But when I stepped back, I realized the one thing he said influenced my playing so much. And especially after coming from Mr. Lipsett, I was able to figure things out in a way that would not have been as helpful if I had studied with Mr. Lipsett. So because I had the tools coming from Mr. Lipsett, I was able to implement Mr. Laredo's vision and his input for my playing much better and much more purposely. So that was one thing about him. He had small comments, but they just went a really long way.
Yeah, I think obviously it's amazing two L teachers, but Mr. Lipset obviously gave us a lot of the tools that we needed to eventually work with Mr. Laredo well because yeah, Mr. Laredo, he's more of a performer himself, so he doesn't spend so much time on the building and fundamental technique. And I think he tends to choose students that already are quite developed, and also he shares his studio all the time at CIM, so you can't really study with them individually. I have the same sentiments. And why don't you share a little bit about Malcolm Lowe, because you did work with him for 3 years?
Yes, I want to give him a lot of credit too, because, there are others who didn't get the chance to work with him. So I'm lucky that I was able to. And he had a similar instinct as Loma did, as kind of like carving out or kind of like discerning that individual sound I had. And especially for what I wanted to do, when I was working with Mr. Lowe, I was kind of mitigating what I perceived my purpose was in terms of being a violinist, like what I wanted to do. The time studying with Mr. Lowe, and I think he was part of this, was having more of a clarity of what I specifically wanted to do. His history as concertmaster of the Boston Symphony, he gave me not only tips and tricks, but he came from a perspective of music that would really help me in a role that would be similar to that. I think more specifically, coming to music in a more holistic sense, what's going on in the orchestra? Like when you're playing the solo, whether it's concertmaster solo or a concerto, like knowing what's going on, like matching the timbre of the horn here, for instance, it's kind of a more all encompassing perspective for music that is more than just sounding great as a violinist and being a hotshot virtuoso. I mean, he had kind of a bigger picture and bigger image. And also with Mr. Lowe, I remember every once in a while, you generally seem pretty calm in lessons. Every once in a while, he would say something that would just stick. And it was just like be an explosive light bulb in my head. There was one time he told me, John, you're never going to have to worry about not being musical because you are innately, like, you have a lot of ideas. And that was one of the things that maybe not for everyone, but for me, I was just like, wow, I don't have to worry about this. It was a huge roadblock. It's like, oh, I have to be technically perfect in auditions, but at the same time, I want to make sure that I'm music making. It's like, I don't have to, I already love the music and that's not going to die. That's not going to go away. As long as my motive for having a good technical facility is sound and it serves the music, I don't have to worry about like I'm sacrificing the music. I wish I had more examples, but he would say things like that were just light bulbs in my head from time to time. So yeah, I want to give credit to Mr. Lowe. I also want to give credit to Steve Rose, who I did study because there was a lot of leave of absences and a lot of changes going on at CIM. And so I studied with Steve Rose for a semester. And I just want to say, like, as a person and as an orchestral player, ultimate role model, honestly, like a big role model for me. So I just want to have a little shout out.
Yeah, we love Mr. Rose here on the podcast. So I would just like to move forward and ask, how did you end up at Rice Shepherd School of Music studying with Paul Kantor?
I think Mr. Kantor, in terms of all the teachers I had, I'm very thankful that Mr. Kantor has been part of the product. You can almost think of him as a bridge between the styles of Mr. Laredo and Mr. Lipsett, in that he has a lot of students that are working on technical fundamentals. I mean, like at the end of the day, we all are. His studio is a very supportive and people are coming from all kinds of places and understanding and in terms of their experience. So he has a way of just kind of figuring out creative solutions for things that work. With Mr. Cantor, there's no one correct way. But wherever you are and wherever you're at with the violin, with music, he has ways of coming up with creative solutions, tons of creative energy, and also finding a way to loosen you up. And it's like I had just worked with Mr. Cancer for a year and I just felt like so much more like everything seemed more natural, more ergonomic, and it was kind of mysterious. I'm not exactly sure, but he has a way of thinking about music that is kind of contagious and just makes a lot of sense. The way he came at things like made a lot of sense. And he's very, very clever and can come at things from different angles and very good at kind of over time without even you noticing kind of shaping a perspective that might serve you a little better about things and also like about music, but also about life. I think in general, I would describe Mr. Cantor about someone who is extremely helpful and wants to be extremely helpful in any way that he can. And he has the ability to do so.
Yeah, I didn't get to study with Mr. Cantor, but from what I know and hear, he is a very intellectual person and he has a very calm and cool and thoughtful way of approaching any technical problem in the violin and in music. And of course, he is a musician first, but obviously he teaches the violin very well. And so that's amazing that you were able to get so much out of him. And just overall, I mean, these are all some of the great mentors and teachers in the music field. And so I'm sure you and I both feel very grateful to have had the opportunity to study with them. So, as I understand, you are just coming off of your second year at Rice. So you graduated, I believe.
Yeah, well, I am departing Rice because I just had my trial as concertmaster of the Boise Philharmonic. So I'm going to be up in Boise next year working there. And I'm very grateful because Boise is like, they're a good group of musicians, but they're not like a orchestra that they're playing every week. And it's not like week in and week out, but they give a good punch with what they have. And I was very pleased when I went up there. And so I'm just really grateful for this new work opportunity coming my way. So next year, I'm going to be concertmaster of the Boise Phil, and I'm also going to be teaching at the College of Idaho. I'm going to be able to fulfill kind of my work pursuits from many different angles, and I'm going to be able to have a job that's pretty all encompassing. So I'm very excited about that. And I'm glad that I've had Mr. Cantor along with my other teachers to synthesize kind of a development that I think is going to really help me in this role, both as a performer and teacher.
Yeah. So did you not finish your degree at Rice or was it only a 2 year?
No, I didn't because I've only had 1 year at Rice, and in order to finish my degree, I have to get all my credits for 2 years, which is too hard to do. So, but Rice was the second master's. So Rice, in a sense, was such a prolific and wonderful place to. I mean, the sense was I had a different vibe and sense than CIM, particularly like in just the way things were structured, particularly in the orchestral program. And I think it was really good for me to have gone there, but it was second master's program. And I told myself, like, if this works out, right, this job was here and it's something I really wanted to do. It's kind of close to home for me. And I decided that, like, if this works out, I'll move to Boise. And, I have a bachelor's and master's, and I'm very thankful for that. And I'm very thankful that I was also able to have time at the Shepherd School.
Yeah, sorry, I made a mistake. You were only there for 1 year, but you actually won the trial position in your first semester there. And I remember we talked about that. And huge congrats on passing the trial. What was the audition like overall? And what was your experiences with past auditions? And
I'll just preface by saying, like, I'm very grateful for this position because I think this position makes a lot of sense for me in terms of like the community there and the morale. It's also close to home. I had taken all kinds of auditions. I had auditioned in Cleveland. I have auditioned in London. This feeling, kind of this apprehension that a lot of, especially master's students, but even bachelor students get that, I'm going to have to get a job. This feeling that everything I've worked up for, it ought to manifest in winning a job or doing something somewhere. So I'm very grateful that this was there for me. And I had done all kinds of auditions, was like, I would love for this to work out and be successful. But like, I mean, I'm sure it would be a great job, but like, I'm not sure if I'd be really happy in the section of this big orchestra. So I think it was good that I've had audition experience because it helped me be ready for this audition, which is like an orchestra that's certainly it's growing and just a wonderful place to be. It's a great group, but it's also like it obviously not Cleveland, it's not Chicago, it's not LA Phil. That I was able to have these experiences where the stakes felt pretty high coming in. And I remember going in Boise is that wherever you're auditioning, whether it's in London or whether it's in Boise, is like something to keep in mind, I think, is like just the experience triggers the same kind of nerves for me. Like the nerves don't go away. And even like being in Akron Symphony in Cleveland, the nerves don't really go away. And because of that, every experience you can be behind the screen is like, I think, really helpful just to know how it's going to feel. I just want to say a word of encouragement for people because winning your first one or two auditions that's a kind of strange case that happens. And that does happen to people. But typically, it's very hard to be successful just coming in for the first time because it really helps to have a feel for how it's going to be. Boise, like my heart was pounding just as fast as in any other audition. I was doing my things. I had gone on a run. I had meditated and this kind of stuff. And I went in and my heart was pounding just as fast as it was for any of these other auditions. So just knowing how it feels, I think, is super important.
Yeah, and so we shared private conversations about how you had always wanted to be a concertmaster or a section leader. And so I think it's really amazing that this job worked out because this is a concertmaster position. And knowing John as a player, you're such a outwardly emotional player, and you wouldn't feel comfortable if you had to suppress a lot of your own musical thoughts and ideas. We've talked about a lot how you would rather be concertmaster of a smaller, lesser orchestra than be in a greater orchestra and be a section position. Obviously, if you get offered something, it's hard to pass up, but we've had these conversations, and maybe ultimately this job is going to be more fulfilling in the long run. And so, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think another cool thing about my position here is I can, beyond just the musical and artistic aspect of this work that I'll be doing, is like more so than a lot of other places I've seen. The community in Boise is actually one of the fastest growing communities in the country. They also have a really, really substantial appreciation for the Philharmonic and the music scene in Boise. And there's this beautiful emergence of kind of ordinary people who just really appreciate the music there. And that's because in Idaho, I think maybe part of the reason is like surrounding Boise, there's not too much of that. And so it's really important for people that they have this avenue. So to recognize the appreciation people have for music is really great. And I think in a big city like LA, I mean, there's a million things to do in LA. So it's sometimes not as apparent. So I think it just really brings it down home in the area I'll be working.
Yeah, I totally am there with you. I have played in regional orchestras, and you'd be surprised the amount of love and appreciation that you can get from the audience members there because they really appreciate it. Whereas when you're in a big city, you kind of expect certain things, and maybe they go to a concert and they're just there just because they can and just to hear the symphony. But for a smaller place like Boise, for them to have an orchestra of that caliber, I think they're already very grateful for. And so I'm sure you're going to contribute a lot to that city, and I'm really excited for your future there. We've already talked about this before in private, but winning the audition and you talking about how you really were able to bring out everything in terms of your own personal sound, and you left everything out in the floor, especially in the final round. What was your experience through all 3 or 4 rounds there?
For me, one of the motivations when I was young, I think one of the biggest inspirations for me was some of the violin moments that you get in the orchestral repertoire. So when I was young, one of the pieces that was a gem for me that kind of motivated me towards classical music that I discovered when I was young was Scheherazade. It was kind of like a secret pleasure for me to kind of run up to, our family computer and just play this recording on YouTube of Scheherazade over and over again that I don't think it even exists anymore. So that was one of my biggest ambitions and motivators when I was young. And I always felt like if I can be in an environment like Colburn and receive a training and also work really hard and kind of discover my voice as a violinist and kind of reach my potential, I can bring that potential that I'd have, as a big soloist. I could bring that to an orchestral setting, and that can help not only in playing concertmaster solos, but that also can help, your own section. It can help with the synthesis of the string sections and the woodwind if you're very confident. And if you can synthesizing, melding together the integrity of your craft to a kind of all-encompassing understanding of the score and what the bigger message of the music is beyond being a great violinist. So that's something that I think being a concertmaster is best of both worlds. And it's not like, as a concertmaster, you're suddenly there and you can do what you want. I mean, in fact, I think my job there is not to impose my own style or something silly like that. It's more, I'm absolutely in service to the vision of the orchestra when I'm there. It's not about putting myself on display, but it's about if I have anything that's meaningful to offer, which I may have, I may not have, I don't know. It depends on the dynamic between the conductor but if I do, then that can help the vision of the orchestra. So I think generally, like, it really harnesses the best of both worlds to be in a position like that, while still, recognizing that I'm in a job of service. And, of course, I don't get as much freedom as I would be soloing. But the music, I still think the best music ever written is when the composer uses all the tools and resources they have to them. And I think there's just a universe that can be created with orchestral music. And I've always loved orchestral music so much, with the caveat that sometimes I feel a little subdued in this section. So I'm really grateful that I have the honor of being in such a position.
Yeah, touched on a lot of points there from your early love of music. And I actually forgot to ask you just how you fell in love with music, but just that story of you going to listen to Scheherazade, I'm sure penetrated a lot for lots of listeners.
Yeah, for someone who was kind of like living this dual identity as like someone who went to school, and then I started being homeschooled, and also would drive 2.5 hours to have lessons. I wasn't sure what my identity was as a kid, and there were times I felt like a little lonely, and that music was an outlet for me. When I was 10 years old and I discovered Scheherazade, and it was a complete escape and took me into a world of this wonder and brilliance that I did not know existed in reality. And for a kid to discover that was really, really meaningful. And yeah, I think deep down, like, especially what I touched on studying with Mr. Lowe and some other teachers, that like my vision of what I really wanted to do became clearer.
Yeah, and talking a little bit more about your concertmaster role, but how you got there. You had done a couple solo competitions, and of course, as violinists, we mostly train to become soloists, that sort of avenue, especially through undergrad and masters even. What was that transition like from maybe deciding to do orchestra? Because I think it's kind of a big transition.
Especially coming from an institution like Colburn. Colburn is designed to prepare you, give you the skills and the instructors you need to reach your potential as being at the top of your field. I mean, that's what Colburn's kind of about. And so there's one point where you have to put in practicality and you have to say, okay, well, this is what I do. I love to do it. And I know that I have the potential to take this into a career. But, there's a million competitions. And am I really going to be a soloist? I mean, that's kind of like saying, I'm going to run for governor of the state, or I'm going to become president. Like, there comes a time when you need to be practical about what you're doing. And I know that there are people that are much more qualified than I am to be a soloist. And the other thing is, like, I grew up listening to Heifetz and Oistrakh, and Michael Rabin was a huge one for me. I grew up listening to all of Michael Rabin's recordings, and you listen to recordings as a soloist and you'd be like, oh, I want to do that. At the end of the day, there's so many recordings and so many soloists out there. So like, what do I have to add to that? Honestly, probably not very much, because there are so many beautiful voices out there. Even today, I have peers that are my age that are doing wonderful things in the music world right now as soloists. And so coming to terms with practicality, I think, to answer your question, was a big kind of point of clarity for me. It's like, well, what do I actually want to do? And furthermore, what is the most purposeful element? I mean, the dream of soloing feels really good for me, but what is something that I'd be able to kind of filter in my passions in a more encompassing level? As a concertmaster, I'm able to synthesize my love for the violin, my love for what I believe to be the most profound and effective and innovative works that ever came from composers, which is the orchestral repertoire. I'm able to be a presence and be a part of someone that can serve the community and who the community appreciates. I'm able to do chamber music. I'm able to teach. So, like, I think just the role of the concertmaster for me, I mean, seemed perfect. Some of the most memorable, I think my most memorable summer festival was at Aspen 2022, when I was in Aspen Chamber Symphony. And I got to kind of sit with some of the guest concertmasters that came in, like, David Halen and Alex Carr, Robert Chen. Being in an orchestral cycle day in and day out, the thing with that is you really have to love it in order for it to not get boring. But if you're really, really into it, like orchestra playing like that can be so rewarding, actually. And I remember how much fun I had. And kind of that summer was one of the points as well. And along with some of the teachers I had, that, I had some clarity on, like, this is really something I'd like to do. And if I can do it while not having to suppress my personal voice too much, that would be amazing.
Yeah, you touched on so many good points there. And I was actually going to ask about Aspen, but we talked about some other things. But I'm totally with you there in that you initially have this dream of being a musician and maybe these fantasies about being a soloist. But then I think you realize that, yes, the world has too many soloists for there to be enough opportunities for everyone. And so it's a little bit humbling, and it almost grounds you a little bit to think about how you can actually serve the world in a more practical way. And I think that if you can carry that same amount of will and that same enthusiasm of being a soloist, and you can bring that into even just a section job in an orchestra, I think that is the best blend of both worlds, because we don't live in an idealized world where everyone can just play their violin and solo and make money. I think there are roles, and most people have to serve in an orchestra, and I think that makes sense. If there's too many opinions and soloists out there in the world, I don't think that would be a good thing either. So
It's like, I mean, what happens to dream teams as like the manager? Usually it doesn't work out if the chemistry isn't great, if, there's 5 stars on the basketball court at the same time.
totally. And just since you touched on Aspen, let's maybe briefly touch on a couple other summer festivals. I went to Aspen 3 times, and just playing in the orchestra there day in, day out, it really got me more accustomed to the orchestral lifestyle, even though I had done so much orchestra growing up. But just doing it even more, all the rehearsals, and just it's very grounding again, being in an orchestra, playing every day. And that really helped me develop my love for orchestra more. So I personally am the same. I would love to join an orchestra. And so, yeah, maybe expand more on Aspen, and you went to Heifetz as well, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, my track was kind of like after Meadowmount, Aspen. It kind of actually it serves as a good metaphor for when you're young and you feel more ideal about things. You go to Meadowmount, say, I'm going to become the best I can. And you think about Jaime Laredo at Meadowmount. You think of Michael Rabin at Meadowmount and how their careers exploded when they studied with Galamian there. And it's like, that could be me. And then you go to Aspen and realize that there's maybe more of a connection between what you do and the world at large. There are some orchestra jobs that I would like absolutely not like to have. And not to say that orchestra is the best thing to do, but you realize that there's like a maybe sincere appreciation for this type of art form. So after Meadowmount, I went to Heifetz, and Heifetz is kind of on the same page as Meadowmount. It seemed like it kind of like a Meadowmount. However, it was a little more liberating. It wasn't as strenuously strict, and you got to perform a lot. And for just young artists that were kind of following in those footsteps. And then I remember I went to Colburn right after Heifetz. And then one kind of neat thing about studying with Mr. Lipsett is that he has a big presence at Aspen, and he would take a good number of the students with him. So yeah, I was just exposed to a lot of different things. There's a lot of pathways. There's great chamber music going on at Aspen, and I still got that amazing, disciplined, yet fruitful tutelage with Lipsett there. It was still very, it had a kind of like serious and almost revering or reverence quality to his studio classes. And I got that. I got orchestral music. And, there's a contemporary music scene. My roommate from Rice is a composer, really innovative and creative guy, and doing a lot of really neat things. And he's going to Aspen this summer. So there's contemporary music. So there's a lot of avenues at these festivals that you can explore, which was, I think, one of my favorite things about Aspen. And also in a great area, of course, had a great time. I have friends now in the music world, and we can reminisce about how wonderful Aspen was.
Yeah. And then we actually did Music Academy of the West one summer, 2023 together.
Yeah, right. Music Academy is great. And I'm going there again.
Oh,
Since we haven't caught up, yeah, so I'm going there again now. And I think part of the reason was like, it's a great place to, well, be in a great location and also get some fresh air and also be in really good shape for what's to come up. And what I love about Music Academy, I think it's a really cool place because you get so much input from so many different artists, and you get different perspectives. You get to talk with people. They have like these lunchtime discussions. I met a lot of people that I was very fortunate by, the likes of, Mr. Hadalick. And I remember, other soloists came in. I remember I met David Chan there, who is also like a wonderful concertmaster and held a great rep class this past year at Shepherd School. Yeah, you just get to meet all these people who share different ideas, and it just expands your own understanding about what you do. And also working with different conductors, having different guest conductors for every concert is really good training and really good experience for orchestral players.
yeah. It's so funny that you're going there again, because I ended up going to Music Academy 3 times in total, 2 times after we went the first summer. And you were actually going to come back the second summer, but things didn't work out. And then, yeah, so things all have a time and a
Yeah,
place.
I guess I just missed you. Yeah, so you're not going a fourth time.
I can't, unfortunately. Lastly, I just want to touch on, because I understand, John, you like to write music as well, and you do a little bit of conducting, which is amazing. And you also play piano too. So, what are your motivations for these other avenues? And I know we've talked a lot about how we want to be well rounded musicians, so not just only violinists. I personally, as you may know, am very big on that. I like to play piano as well and sing. So, what motivated you to do that?
Yeah. So, I mean, actually, one thing that I kind of is an idea that I stand by is that actually something Mr. Lipsett you talk about is the idea of our music. We're becoming more and more specialized. And one positive aspect of becoming more specialized is that there's more focus and attention to one thing. And because of that, the standard's getting higher. But another part of that is there's a universe of music that's out there. There's a universe of ways we can implement our art that maybe have been more explored in the past than they are now. So like back in the day, like Fritz Kreisler, even like Vinyavsky, Vuitton, these violinists who were rock stars in their day. Violin was not something that you perform other people's works and you make recordings. Violin was something that you are a traveling performer in the way that a songwriter today is, in a way that Frank Sinatra was. It was expected that you would write your own music. That's an idea that I kind of really felt that resonated with me. And so, like, I love when my spare time, I'll have ideas and just jot them down when I can. A lot of them maybe are a little contrived towards the sound of the golden age of violin, but I love to make arrangements for violin and piano. Right now, I'm actually recently been getting a little more into orchestration. I love arranging things and transcribing things. But yeah, I've done things like quartet transcriptions of piano literature, but mostly I think the thing I'm like to do most is arranging maybe even orchestral pieces, but like piano pieces for violin and piano.
Yeah, I remember you arranged the Debussy piece for violin in Mr. Sloman's concert for a small string orchestra. So it's amazing that you're able to branch out, and I think that you were given also a talent for composition. So I'm excited to see where that leads you. Yeah, you didn't talk about conducting, but I remember you conducted the Colburn Orchestra at Colburn just, for in a rehearsal, I believe, right?
Yeah, because I wanted to try it out and also get people the opportunity for the three horns. We did Beethoven Eroica and we had like a euphonium for second horn. But yeah, I know I have a conducting bug in me, and that also is actually part of my concertmaster enthusiasm. Not that I want to hijack or take over an orchestra, but I know that I have this impulse in me and it comes back. Like it kind of leaves and then comes back and I know it's gonna come again. When I was at CIM, I had the pleasure to work with the assistant conductor a little bit. And I thought that was really amazing because he's this German guy who is probably in his 30s and recently came here and got this job as assistant conductor for the Cleveland Orchestra. And I think the quality of his teaching was something similar to, or even greater than, a wonderful music conservatoire would you would be in debt to go to. And I was able to pay him like $50 per hour for lessons. So I was really privileged to do that. But I'm hopeful that, like I think at the end of the day, I'm doing what I most love in music with the violin. And I'm hopeful that I'm able to, in some small way, implement conducting.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, David Chan, he's doing a lot of conducting, and, Joseph Silverstein also conducted a little bit. So, a lot of great concert masters, they share the same DNA as great conductors. So, that's very exciting.
Yeah, in Europe, you see that as well with similar trend and also historically.
Okay, with that, we covered so many things. We like to end every episode on practice tip of the week and recording recommendations. So, John, what is your weekly practice tip?
All right. Well, this might seem a little simple. I don't know, but I would like to share something that has helped me in my it's more of a concept a little bit that has helped me with intonation. And that's something that Mr. Kantor has talked about. A lot of students will try to be perfect on targeting a shift and making sure the interval's completely right. But rather than coming from an element of it has to be perfect or else, I'll immediately move and start over. I have recently been practicing if I miss a shift or a double stop is not quite in tune, or I just miss aim, instead of immediately trying it again, sitting with it and slowly readjusting it. And the idea that perfection is not the goal, but with that, your margin of error over time becomes narrower and narrower until there is hardly any margin of error. Mr. Heifetz in his recordings is something that maybe people in your audience have heard. If you slow his recordings down, he's missing things, but he just adjusts so quickly that you can't hear. And it's not that you should settle for inadequate intonation, but instead of demanding perfection for yourself, see if you can make your margin of error smaller and smaller by having a very present and intentful ear and adjusting over time.
Yeah, Heifetz famously talked about that, and I believe Shmuel Ashkenazi also said that you don't play perfectly in tune, you just adjust quick enough so no one can hear. And I'm totally with you on the margins thing because no one has a 100% chance of nailing everything, but it's all percentages, and yeah, I agree, you're just decreasing the percentages, and that's what practice is for, really.
Or you're upping your batting average for getting it perfectly. And it's actually reverse psychology because by not pursuing perfection, you're going to get closer to perfection.
Yeah, it's a wonderful paradox there. Well, that's a great practice tip, and I'm going to implement that. What is your recording recommendation?
I came across a recording recently. It was so unique and special, had so much to say that I couldn't resist, leaving it off the show. And that is Yehudi Menuhin playing Zigeunerweisen. This is part of a collection of recordings that he did when he was young. And it's kind of an era of his playing that, well, actually, if you read about Menuhin, he has a really interesting developmental story. He has a period when he was very young where he was questioning a lot of things when things weren't really working. And he just kind of something had clicked for him. But particularly in this recording, he has a vibrato that like almost throbs in a way, but it's not in a way that it's like restraining or tight. It's very natural. It just really suits the music so well. And there's a lot to be learned from this style of playing. And it's also kind of, the stoicism that both him and his pianist kind of exercise is almost comical. They look so serious. But another thing I appreciate about this recording is that I'm not against people moving. I move plenty when I perform, but I feel like when there's too much action, too many emotions being shown, it can maybe take away from the beauty of the music sometimes. And so it's almost comical how much the other way many of his early recordings are, because he actually looks quite upset when he plays. But it's the idea that he's completely focused on the music and there's no attention to his outward appearance or emotion, other than, of course, being cordially dressed up and presenting yourself well. But that is my recording recommendation, Yehudi Menuhin playing Zigeunerweisen.
Yeah, awesome recording recommendation. I might have heard it before, but I'll definitely check it out again. I think that the older artists, they definitely moved less, and definitely the focus was on the music itself, which I think is a very admirable quality. I just want to add that I feel that Yehudi Menuhin, he has a very noble quality to his playing. Of course, he was English and he does these vibrato slides that are so heart-wrenching, and so I'm excited to hear that. And he talks a lot about vibrato in his violin teaching videos and the rolling of the fingers, and he has an amazing wrist vibrato, I would say. So I would imagine that that sort of sound would suit Zigeunerweisen very well.
I think it indeed matches his noble quality.
Yes, he plays the Elgar and Walton concertos very well. Okay, well, that will conclude episode 24 of A Musical Soliloquy. Thank you, John, so much for joining, and I will see John and the audience again next episode.